Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, thank you for having me here today, for sharing a few views on what the notion of always being online in a city implies for public sector-oriented education. Because all these services offered to the general public are just instances where a back office chain that supports all the business processes in public administration are running to the general public. So you always have little interconnections to the general public where you offer services here and there. But at the back office, you need something to support the overall process. That is the central data repository, and that performs the central business logic following that process. Something we have seen in the private sector now for 20-odd years, and I think services offered to citizens who are being online by a metropolis of the 21st century, which was my topic here, can only be offered by such systems. As I said, we have them already in the private sector. They are enterprise resource planning systems, ERP systems, and they are increasingly being used in the public sector as well. The question is now, what does this imply for the education of medium and high-ranking civil servants? ERP software, enterprise resource planning software, stems from the private sector, originally covered operations management and logistics, but today it covers nearly all areas of city management. I just picked out a few. That ranges from budgeting and accounting, procurement, asset management, but now growing into much more specific areas which you would not have in an original private sector ERP system, such as municipal case management, grants management, municipal utilities, up to law enforcement, which of course also exists on a municipal level. Just remember all those little parking fines you sometimes get. They also need to be administrated. Management of parking space, city tolls, which are increasingly introduced, up to tax collection declarations, everything associated with the Aarhus Convention, which enables every citizen, or entitles every citizen of the European Union to have access to relevant environmental information and to participate in environment-relevant decision-making. And all this in one integrated system, plus, and that's the additional bonus, having analytics and strategic planning on top of those back-end processes. This is not the future, this is the reality in the private sector. And every municipality, every public sector entity that actually introduces an ERP system to handle its back-office processes faces the same situation. And again, I'm asking the question, what does this mean for the education of the higher-ranking civil servants? Well, what did it mean for the private sector? Because 20 years ago, the private sector faced exactly the same situation. And my institute, more specifically, has been engaged in the vocational training of students in ERP systems applications, in operations and logistics management. My institute is actually production management, so I'm not public sector. I have to excuse myself. And one of the first things managers in companies introducing ERP systems had to learn was that their way of managing things and their way of seeing things has changed. For the first time, the process in its entirety became visible. We did not just work with isolated information silos. I'm doing sales and I'm only doing sales. I'm the accountant guy and everything beyond accounting doesn't interest me. But for the first time you could see the entire process from product development to procurement to production to distribution logistics, to service management, to the case where somebody comes along with a product he bought and says, hey, it doesn't work. For the first time, the entire process became readily visible. And the same is going to happen at the moment you introduce an ERP system in public administration. The process will become visible. This means, of course, that the granularity of management will change. It's not a specific function, it's the process. This also means higher data quality, with, of course, improved auditing and compliance checking mechanisms. But also the process as such became something to be manageable. Particularly with up-to-date web service-oriented architectures like SAP NetWeaver and similar technologies, you could easily assemble new processes very fast. This enabled companies, and in the future also city administrations or public administrations in general, to introduce new processes very fast. Because they had all the relevant master data, they had all the relevant functionalities in their granularity available and could recombine them rapidly to support a new process. In the private sector, a new product. In the public sector, a new service to the citizen. And this is also a difference in management style, in how you envisage management as such. And I've already mentioned the positive effects on compliance and auditability. And I think the banking crisis has taught us a very painful lesson that compliance is not a luxury. Now, what does this mean for public sector education? I crossed out the word ERP education. You enter this function, you click on this, and then this happens. That's not the way it should work. Rather, ERP could, normatively should, become an integral part of the education. This has become an integral part of the education of logistics and operations managers, or future logistics and operations managers. What does this mean? The core and the starting point is always the process. What do I have to represent in the system, in the IT system, but also what kind of service do I have to render? And here, for instance, I picked out procurement, a public sector procurement thing, which is, of course, a highly regulated process, subject to 2 EU directives dating back to 2004, regulating public procurement and sector procurement. And being a directive, it was implemented in various implementation laws in the member states. So this is the process we are now considering. Well, on the one side, you have the legal, the administrative aspects to it. Something in administrative sciences. Well, I picked out a few sample aspects. What kind of award procedures are there? When do they apply? What are their limits? What is an approval workflow and why do I need it? How does the procurement process hook up to the budgeting process? And where would I probably need an approval workflow where these two meet? What are substitutes and how do I handle substitutes? Then, of course, the EU requirements, you know, the thresholds where you have to send everything to TED and publish it centrally. Legal remedies and how do I prepare for legal remedies? And numerous other points. That is, of course, well, these are the elements of a standard public sector course on procurement. However, having an ERP system, being part of the education, you cannot just teach it to people on some boring slides like those. You can really show them. You have use cases implemented in the system and say, thank you, and say, that's the case, let's go through it. Let's see how it actually works. And interlink it with a legal and administrative sciences base. On the other hand, you have the more technical aspects, because you will always have more technically oriented people in a public administration. What does it mean to customize a process? Why is an ERP system actually able to handle so many different kinds of public administrations who have very different conceptions of how a process should work? Why is it still one system that can handle all that? It's due to customizing, and what does it mean, and how do I do it, and how do I manage customizing and adaptation projects? And then, of course, various technical aspects, digital signatures, cryptography, and so on. And this, of course, also implies legal and regional aspects. Because we are part of the European Union, and we should think Europe, because the relevant, or many of the relevant aspects, are being decided centrally and are not decided on the national level anymore. So, do I have a certain setup phase for the project? What does it mean to have that in the entire case? And of course, if such a training schedule is set up, it will look pretty much the same in many European countries, and of course in many pre-accession countries alike. And such a joint teaching program would probably not even have language barriers, because IT-related material would be in English anyway. Localization, of course, being an option. But top-level civil servants probably will have to become proficient in English anyway. As I said, the localization of the teaching material will, of course, always be an option. And such a joint education program on the European level, or on a regional level, encompassing possibly EU and non-EU, or not yet EU member states yet, would have huge economies of scale. You have to provide the survey infrastructure, for instance, just once. You have to provide the e-learning content just once. And there will also be an exchange of opinions. Of course, this regional setup will also have to be set up very carefully, because you still have variations in the legal base. So I think I'm still in time. Thank you for your attention, and I think the Q&A session will be afterwards. Thank you.